What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Fear Not, Do Right podcast. There's been a word that has been weighing on my mind. You could call it a word, you could call it a virtue, but the word is good. Jocko Willink had a pretty viral video that got, I've heard of this video and I've even quoted this video for years, where he basically hypothesizes all these inconveniences, and he meets those inconveniences with the word good. You broke your legs. Good. Now you can focus on upper body in the gym. Stuff like that. I think that the message and the virtue of goodness is a lot different and a lot more important than what we give it credit for. We throw it around very laissez-faire, where we're just, hey man, how are you doing? I'm good, right? If you were to speak in proper English, you wouldn't say you're doing good. If you were doing good, it means that you'd be like Superman saving people. If you're doing well, it means your well-being is good, right? But let's talk about goodness, all right? I'm called back to a Christmas song where it talks about Santa Claus seeing you when you're sleeping and knowing when you're awake and knowing if you're bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. We have this government spying on us, that's no secret. We even have Israel spying on us. That was revealed by Mr. Ted Cruz in a recent interview that he did. But what does it mean to be good for goodness sake? Being good means that you are doing things, or you are displaying virtues, or you are enacting things that benefit not just you but those around you. It's a virtue that is not just something that you necessarily do, and it's not something that you can just be, but it's something that requires a lot of dedication. It requires study. It requires discipline to be good. When we're good for our own benefit, that's just marketing. That's branding, right? Why is our product good? Because we want you to buy it. Why is this car good? Because I want that commission that I'm going to get from selling you this car. Why is this podcast good? This podcast is the best podcast. It's a great podcast. It's a very good podcast because I want you to listen to it. But when we're actually good and it benefits nobody, does not benefit ourselves, but we are good out of moral virtue and principle, I think that's when it means the most. That's when we are actualizing being good. That's where the discipline comes in. Now again, to reference to our commando friend, Mr. Jocko Willink, he talks about discipline quite a bit. I mean, he's written volumes, he's written books and volumes of podcasts and speeches on discipline. And I think it is very relative to the idea of being good and goodness for goodness sakes. It is not something that comes overnight. Most people have a proclivity towards helping themselves. And that's not just a onesies, twosies, or even a broad stroke. That is literally every single person is gonna do things that benefit them. Always. And you have to. You have to eat, you have to clean you have to take care of yourself. You have to manage yourself in a way to where you have the capacity to help others. You can't help other people if you can't help yourself. But there comes moments in, occasionally, and even smaller moments in our day-to-day lives where it's less about taking care of ourselves, or we have an opportunity to take care of ourselves and help ourselves out, or we have those opportunities to help someone else out. That's where the discipline of being good really takes effect, and where it really takes root. And as we develop that discipline, it becomes more of a habit. It's the same thing as brushing your teeth every day. It's the same thing as making your bed every day. It's the same thing as waking up on time for work every day, sticking to a regimentation, sticking to a schedule. It's the same thing as going to the gym, especially on those days when you really don't want to. What are the ways that you can be good or display goodness for goodness sakes in spite of the conditions surrounding that decision? When is it the hardest to be good or make the good decision? Not even necessarily the correct or the right decision, but the good decision when it's most difficult. I think when we talk about goodness as a discipline, it really does take carving it out and making it habitual in our day-to-day lives. And that goes into why we do it. Again, if you do it for yourself, if you do it to look good, that's just branding. That's just brand management. But when we do it for the virtue of being good, that's when it's actually good. And why is that important? Now, if you're theological, if you're religious or anything like that, you'll probably resonate with this more. But even if you're not, you can agree that most of our societal standards and most of the ways that we live our lives are based and predicated upon historic theological standards. The most basic one being the 10 Commandments. And really, when you break that down, right, the idea of what makes something good and what makes something not good, or the opposite of good, bad, it breaks down to, does it coalesce and is it in line with what God, prophets, evangelists, what God teaches and what those standards are, or is it counter to that? And I think that's where, today's day and age, it is so murky, so muddled, and so confusing as to what constitutes a good action and what constitutes maybe a correct action. There's so many different avenues that you could go down this, but I think one that is really basic and really relevant is war, right? I'm a veteran. A lot of people who listen to this are veterans. Most of my friends are veterans. When you talk about war, we signed up for it, but there really isn't anything more evil or negative, having a negative effect on society as a whole, as the world as a whole, than the concept of war. And we're not just talking about like combat or battles or anything like that. We're talking about a full scale, this is a thing, entity against entity, right? The societal impact that has and the toll that it takes usually involves thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives, billions and now trillions of dollars. And there, at the end of the day, there really is not a great ROI. I think we can see this really well in early 2000s, the global war on terror, right? There was this huge push, and there's always a narrative that's pushed out where it's good versus evil. But I think anybody that would advocate for a war, you're advocating for something that is inherently evil. When do we then have to choose goodness in the concept of war? Now, at the end of the day, sometimes we got to do what we got to do, and sometimes, not often, but sometimes there is a good versus evil dynamic there. But more often in the precursor and everything leading up to that moment of bang, there's a lot of discourse, there's a lot of advocacy, there's votes, there's speeches, there's tax dollars, there's a lot that goes into it on just the emotional, intellectual, political side. But you'll hear people talk, and we heard this 20 years ago, right? Where we have to get involved in X, Y, or Z conflict for X, Y, or Z reason. And you can justify things as much as you like, But until there is a direct threat against you or your family or your community or your country, where does your responsibility for those actions actually take place? And when are you just going along with what's popular? Back in the beginning of the GWAT, what kicked off the GWAT, it was largely popular to engage in foreign intervention. And there was a lot of people that advocated poorly for that foreign intervention that led to a 20-year war, that led to millions of people dying and trillions of dollars getting spent, and hundreds of thousands of veterans who are now dealing with PTSD, dealing with disability. Their families are dealing with that PTSD and disability. And we also have the epidemic of suicide among that crowd that actually had to go and partake and engage in that conflict, right? What part of that is good? How much of that turned out good? Now, I'll admit there to some silver linings, right? Let's just take that case of Iraq. I went to Iraq in 2020 and 2021, and I can absolutely tell you that there were positives in my experience, in how it developed me as a man, in my personal convictions, in my intestinal fortitude, right? It developed me in a way that I could consider to be, positive. But overall, what good came out of that conflict? And what was the good decision? What was the good stance to have versus what was seen socially correct? I also think this is very impactful when it comes to our families and what is acceptable socially, what is acceptable even in like social media and things like that, and then what we're actually willing to let happen to our loved ones, especially parents and our kids. You know, I grew up in a day and age when technology wasn't a thing. We had Barney on VHS tapes and we had Nickelodeon on the orange cassette tapes, right? Our exposure to what kids have nowadays was incredibly limited, almost non-existent to what kids are able to get their hands on nowadays. Is it acceptable to allow small children to be engaged with super high stress, highly addictive, fast-paced games, TV shows, and content online? It is considered acceptable. I don't think you can go to any restaurant in America and not see a 5-year-old with an iPad that he's glued to while he munches on, Red 40 and seed oil nuggets. And it's better that he's just quiet and off doing his thing. That is acceptable, or at least that is accepted today largely by Western societies. But is it good? What is the good option there? What is the goodness for goodness sake, not for convenience? Because dealing with any small kid at a restaurant is extremely inconvenient. I have 2 of them. Very inconvenient. There's usually a huge mess and it's frustrating, and they probably won't even eat their food unless they're occupied by something other than their food, right? Most of the time, those chicken nuggets that I order for my 4-year-old end up going anywhere but in her mouth. But what is good for that situation? I'm gonna tell you what I think is good is having the opportunity to sit down as a family and have that discourse as a family around the dinner table. That's good. Everybody being pacified by technology is accepted by and large, but can we really say that it's good? Now, here's the other part that comes with the territory of making those good decisions for the sake of making good decisions. people will not like it. Like in that example that I provided where, in 2002, 2003, they said, hey, we need to go to war with this country. And it was popular to say, yeah, let's do it. They hate us for our freedom, let's go do it. If you were counter to that, the names that you were called were abhorrent. People looked at you like a communist if you weren't down for engaging in the global war on terror. It was not popular. Today, if you are, again, at a restaurant with your kids and you have a 4-year-old that is just wilding out because they're not pacified by technology, that is highly unpopular. When we make good decisions, more often than not, it is going to be taken hard by those making bad decisions. If something that I've kind of experienced my whole life, I've never had a sip of alcohol for not just personal reasons, but religious reasons as well. I've never drank, never had a sip. And going into the military, that was wild. Dudes could not comprehend not getting wasted in the barracks every weekend. Fortunately for them, I was always sober, so they always had the DD. They always had someone to bail them out of whatever situation it was and make sure they got home safely, right? But it was highly unpopular, and a lot of people just in their ego and their insecurity almost sometimes would take offense to that, where they're like, oh, you don't drink? Do you think you're better than me? And it's like, dude, I'm not going to say that you can't, but inherently, what's good in that situation there? Is it good to inebriate yourself, take yourself out of that situation, and create a vulnerability mentally, as well as the risk, the possibility, if you are one of those individuals, proclivity towards addiction? That's not good. Likewise, or adversely, is it better to be of sound mind and be able to make sound decisions and always have your wits about you and your wherewithal? That's good. That is the good option there. People are always going to take offense, especially those that are in their own right wrong, and usually they know it. Usually they're going to see, they see your goodness as an attack on them. And it's not necessarily that you're attacking them, it's just that you're choosing good. You're choosing the right, whereas they're choosing what's acceptable, what's convenient, what's popular. When we look at wholesale, right, the last, let's just say 250 years, goodness is what prevails. Goodness is what drives success. And there are billionaires and businessmen with absolutely compromised morals and values, and there are people who've made absolutely horrible decisions that have come out okay at the end. But that doesn't mean that that is good. At no point did they choose goodness for goodness sake, right? For the sake of being a good person. Choosing the right over choosing the much more convenient wrong. I think back to the American Revolution. There was a collective of individuals who chose what was good and what was difficult over what was convenient and what was popular. And they paid for it with, a lot of them paid for it with their lives, but it took a lot of hard-fought battles and bloodshed and difficulty to rely on and stake in that goodness. Likewise, go forward even more. We'll just pick on conflicts here. The American Civil War. Nobody's taking up arms because they don't believe in what they're doing. They're like, I want to be a turd today, so I'm going to go, fight the North, or I'm going to go fight the South, or whatever. I'm sure there were individuals like that, but at the end of the day, especially back then, people had a honor and integrity to stand by their state, to stand by their community. Nowadays we have instant access to everybody across the world. And so collectively as the United States of America, we can guide and see ourselves as the United States of America. Back then, this is written about Robert E. Lee. He didn't go and fight for Virginia because he necessarily thought the South's cause was right or good or just or whatever, but because he understood the goodness in the decision it was to stand by his state and to stand by his community. And because the opposite of that decision would be to fight against his community and to fight against his state. When we look back at that, that's all the community that you have. It's not like you can just hop on the phone or hop on a train or hop on a plane and go all the way across the country like you can today. That's what you got, and that's what you have to defend. And so when we understand, we'll look at those good, better, best decisions. What is the inherent goodness of the decision made, the decision process being made, right? That's what we fall back to, and that's what we see when those difficult decisions and those unpopular decisions are made. It's also the same way where, even at a much smaller scale, good men have built society, right? They've made hard sacrifices, they've done hard things, but even at that day-to-day level, our communities and our societies, and most importantly our families, are built on good men making good decisions, on good men and women making good decisions, trying to support each other, trying to support their families, trying to support their communities. I think every single person who is engaging in that endeavor can say that it is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult to get two people together and work everything out and be absolutely cohesive and unified against all the adversity, against all the struggles that everybody is facing nowadays. And oftentimes it is significantly easier to turn inwards and think about yourself and say, you know what, I need me time. I need to go do whatever it is you got to do. I got to go hit the links. I got to go to the salon. I need to take that time for myself. And there are absolutely moments where we need that. For me, I go shooting, right? I like to hop on a long gun, and I like to send a piece of lead really far away. However, day to day, I know that the good decision to make when it comes down to how tired I am, what I have on my plate, what I'm worried about, what I'm trying to figure out at home, what I'm trying to figure out at work, what is the best decision to be made there? What is the goodness, for goodness sake, to be had in the day-to-day moments of my life? And that is always serving those around me, serving my wife, serving my kids, and being around for them most importantly. If you got something that you need from me, that's great. I'll give you the shirt off my back, but they always come first, because that's the good decision that I can make. That's the goodness for goodness sake that I can develop at that day-to-day level, that discipline that I can build, so that way, when I do have those decisions, it's not really a decision. I'm always gonna pick that every time. I'm gonna make it a habit. I'm gonna make it become second nature to me, to where it's not even second nature, it just becomes a part of my nature. My challenge, I guess you could call it a challenge, or invitation to anybody listening, is to take inventory, right? I don't think anybody takes inventory often enough, but I think we need to take inventory about what it is that we do day to day, what it is that we are talking about day to day, even from small scale stuff to big scale stuff, right? We're doing this in June 2025. There's a lot of turbulence in the zeitgeist what is good? What is good for you? What is good for your family? What is good for your community? What are those around you doing that is good? And what is those around you doing that is bad? Taking a simple inventory. Sometimes it's not always black and white, but I think at the end of the day, we always know kind of anything that we do, if it is inherently good, if it is inherently bad. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. And even when we get into those gray areas, that's when that difficult decision making process comes up, where it's like, dude, how do I navigate this? How do I look at this situation and know everything's going to be okay? How do I know that this is the good choice, but this is the lucrative choice, this is the popular choice, right? I think that whoever was singing about Santa 50, 60, 70 years ago, saying you better not pout, you better not cry, or he sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake, he knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake, right? I mean, yeah, we're talking to kids about getting presents on Christmas from Santa Claus, but at the end of the day, we don't want kids to be good or behaved, I should say. We don't want kids to be behaved on account that they're gonna get anything out of it, or that they're going to, they're incentivized by some prize at the end of the game. I know for me as a dad, I want my kids to be good because they are good. I want them to pick good decisions. I want them to pick the good thing. I want them to go a good way. And I think, even with that, we can fall back onto what Jocko Willink said. In those bad situations, find that good, right? I think that's always going to be better than dwelling on it in negativity and being all sad and boo-boo and poopy pants about it. Where's that good line that we need to find? Where's the good decision making in those moments where we could go a lot of different ways, and some of them are morally or ethically questionable? I know for me, maintaining that mindset and applying it across my family, business, politics, my work, is always, like, you're never going to be wrong. Like, you may be unpopular, you may be unpopular, it may be hard for others to accept or take, they may not understand it, but maintaining that attitude of, I'm going to choose what is inherently good, right? I'm going to choose what is inherently in line, in tune with the teachings of the scriptures, of God. Because not everything is so painted black and white, but anytime we deviate from that principle of goodness, what are we doing? We're compromising ourselves. We're compromising our decision making. We're compromising our moral integrity, and we're compromising our honor. We don't need anybody to be watching over us like Santa Claus and see us when we're sleeping and knowing when we're awake. Sure, we have the government to do that, but is what they're doing good? Who over there is making decisions and saying, yeah, this is inherently, morally, ethically, humanely good? Or does this just fatten a bottom line? Does this just line a pocket? Does this just secure a position and play the whole political game? I think usually when we make those sacrifices and those concessions to goals other than being good for goodness sake, we're deviating from not just our moral potential and who we want to be, but we're also deviating from our divine potential. We are sacrificing our divine heritage, if you want to put it that way, for things that aren't good or aren't as good. There is a talk. If you look it up, look up "Good, Better, Best" talk. I highly recommend looking into that. It is, I guess you can throw it in your inspirational bucket for your weekly drives or whatever it is you have going on this week. But I feel like that really encapsulates that essence of being good for goodness sake. Take inventory of what you got going on around you, your day-to-day decisions, your thoughts and feelings about things, right? Sure, is it, we classify, is it convenient for me or is it good? Is it easy or is it good? Sometimes good can be easy, but I think that if you do that, you'll be able to identify those areas where you may be deficient in sound goodness. And I know I am. That's kind of I actually had a whole different topic that I wanted to talk about in this week's podcast. But just with a lot of things going on, this has been weighing on my mind pretty heavy. And so I wanted to address it. I wanted to share my thoughts and feelings about it. Not because I thought it was comfortable or popular, but because I thought that it was good. I thought that this was the best thing that we could talk about this week is how can we inherently develop our goodness as individuals. I challenge you to think about that, and I challenge you to talk about it with other people, right? Talk about what they find to be good. Not right, not popular, not correct, but good. If you guys want to support the podcast, go to fearnotthereright.com, pick up some merch, and share this podcast with your friends. I hope that you do. And until next time, do just that. And fear not, and do right.